are at an advanced stage of trial, and over the next few weeks, the vaccine rollout program will start pan-India. And there are a multitude of questions that are swirling in the minds of every one of our viewers. How safe will the vaccine be? With so many vaccine candidates pushing out their vaccine, which company's vaccine should you trust? Will you have a choice? Are these vaccines safe at all? Have they been tested enough? Will they have long-term side effects? Should you be amongst the first ones to queue up to get the vaccine? Or should you wait for your friends and your neighbors to get the vaccine first and see if they're okay at the end of it all? Now, these are very, very important questions. And are there specific answers to each of these, or are we in uncharted waters? For a global perspective on these very important questions and more around this debate over the coronavirus, we're joined on India Today at this time from Geneva by Dr. Ana Maria Heno Restepro, head of the World Health Organization's Research and Development Unit. Welcome, Dr. Ana Maria. Joining us on this broadcast from New York is Dr. Saira Madad, Senior Director of Special Pathogens at the New York Center for Health and Hospital. She's also been a star on a Netflix series on pandemics, and if you've seen that, you recognize this face very well. We've also got with us Professor S.K. Sareen. Professor Sareen is Director of the Institute for Liver and Biliary Sciences. He's also been advisor to the Delhi government on dealing with this pandemic. Dr. Shahid Jamil is one of our most respected virologists, Chief Executive at the Wellcome Trust India Alliance, and last but not least, for a dissenting opinion, one of the naysayers, Dr. Narendra Gupta. He's a public health expert and has been very prominently speaking out against these vaccines and how you need to be careful. So let's get started. I want to go across to Dr. Ana Maria first at the World Health Organization, because India is at a stage where over the next few days, the government will hopefully start giving sanction to some of the companies that have put in applications for their vaccines, and then the vaccine rollout will start in India. And the one question people have here, as they do globally, is how safe do you believe the vaccine is, and whether they should be the first ones to queue up, or should they wait and see what happens for the first few million patients? Let's start with Dr. Maria.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the interest. So I just want to make 3 points. The first is that we have more than almost 40 years experience with immunization and vaccines that have helped us, and science has made lots of progress, and that has helped in this pandemic a lot, because thanks to that, not to cut corners, but to using all the technological advances that we have in the 21st century, we were able to have new vaccines that are tested and that are available. That's the first thing. The second thing is that all the criteria for how to decide whether or not a vaccine is safe and effective has been transparently communicated from the beginning, even before we knew the results. In WHO, we have what we have called the target drug profile, that are the characteristics that a vaccine should have for us to consider it safe and effective. And the same happens with the regulatory authorities all around the world. So now the process is ongoing of the thorough review of the evidence, of the data that these companies, these developers are putting together. So we are indeed doing this in a really fast approach, but not cutting corners and not improvising.
So you're saying corners are not being cut, there is no improvisation, and the World Health Organization believes these vaccines are safe for human consumption. But Dr. Saira Madad, in the Netflix series in which you feature, there is a lot of active campaigning from the anti-vaccine lobby. Now, who would have known that that would play itself out in reality as well? And there are people who are watching this broadcast and are wondering, you know, the WHO says that these have been tested, they're satisfied, but there's also a crisis. Who knows what may happen in the long run? Will I deal with long-term side effects? Is it safe? How do you address all those who say, let's wait, let's not jump in to try and get one of the vaccines?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand there's obviously a whole scientific process that happens behind the scene. And when you're seeing a lot of these vaccines being developed in record time, it's important to first know that a lot of the discovery and exploratory research has been done over the past 17 years because coronavirus is something that we faced before, the family of coronaviruses with SARS and MERS. But you're seeing, obviously, as my panelist has mentioned, the technology is something that's being utilized. Some of the technology is new, like the mRNA vaccines. But again, this is something that has been explored for cancer therapies and the like. But one of the things I think that's important to understand is the anti-vaccine movement is certainly something to address. And there's a difference between anti-vax and being vaccine hesitant. Some people want to get vaccinated, but they're a little bit hesitant because they don't know what the process is. Others don't want to get the vaccine at all because there's conspiracy theories going around. So it's important to address it from both ends. And I think that the vaccine companies in general have been providing data, and it's a rolling recovery. We're going to see more and more information come out. But I think the end point is quite clear that a lot of the data that has been collected obviously is on safety, is on efficacy. And you're seeing that transparency is very, very important. You're seeing a number of advisory boards, external advisory boards of experts going through the data, sifting through the data, letting the general public know if it's safe, if it is not safe. The lay person, obviously, if you give them 100 pages of data, they're not going to know what to expect of it. That's why we have experts that are in this field. They're career scientists, and they're telling us this is what to expect. So I feel confident.
But Dr. Madad, you mentioned that mRNA vaccines are being tried out for the first time, and the reality is that this was stuff that used to be written about in medical journals or sci-fi movies or medical fiction movies earlier, and now is being tried out at scale across the human population globally for the first time. And therefore, while of course all trials at this time suggest that in the short term no serious side effects have been seen, people would have this concern about whether their genes would be altered, what impact this would have on their children. Those are questions to which a lot of experts believe that even medicine doesn't have full answers for. How fair is that criticism or concern?
Yeah, so it's really important to address those concerns because we want to make sure that on the onset, if anybody has any questions, we want to answer them. So I think there's a couple of things. First, when we talk about safety and monitoring, this is something that's going to continue to happen. And so even though the vaccines are now being made available, these individuals are going to continue to be monitored for an extended period of time. So you're going to collect safety data to see the efficacy and the overall impact of the vaccine. Second, usually when you see an adverse event, it happens quite within the first few weeks or within the first few months of when the vaccine is administered. It's very rare to see long-term effects of the vaccine impact. And so based on the data that has already been collected, and these trials have been going on since July in some places. And so we have safety data collected over the past 3 to 4 months that does not show any severe adverse effect. Certainly down the road, if there's going to be any adverse effects, it's going to be monitored through the ongoing tracking that's being conducted.
Dr. Shahid Jamil, in an Indian context, how do you think public policy stakeholders, government should try and win over not just the anti-vaxxers who are philosophically opposed to vaccines, but even those who are vaccine hesitant, who don't really mind a vaccine but are not sure if they should be running and queuing up to get a vaccine? How should we try and win that argument, try and convince them about the efficacy of these vaccines?
Well, let me first, as a virologist, come to talk about what you just addressed, whether the mRNA is going to modify our genes. Let me explain this, take a minute to explain this, because I think it's important for transparency and trust. For RNA to get integrated into our genome, it requires 2 steps. It requires converting the RNA into DNA, for which you require an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And then that DNA has to integrate into our DNA using another enzyme which is called integrase. Now, both of these enzymes are absent from human cells. So how can one possibly claim that RNA can integrate into our genes? It's completely absurd. It's just a false narrative that's been circulated. Now, coming to the vaccine hesitant people, I think it's very important to build trust, and to build trust through transparency and good communication. So adverse effects, whatever they may be, have to be addressed transparently and have to be addressed quickly. What we saw in India recently about a claim by somebody who was part of the Serum Institute vaccine trial, that he had some neurological disease because of the vaccine. It should have been investigated properly. At the what Serum Institute did was to threaten this person and say, I'm going to file a 100 crore suit against you. But that's not the way to deal with it. The way to deal with it is to transparently address the issue. Maybe the person had an underlying condition. Maybe he was just got a placebo. Whatever it may be, it should have been addressed medically, not through courts. And that is how you will build transparency and trust in vaccines.
Dr. Narendra Gupta, we've got a very, very distinguished global panel here. You've got people who are watching and they're wondering, can we trust the experts? You've been talking about some of your reservations and why you're in the hesitant category. Lay them out and then maybe we can get the experts to explain why they don't believe your concerns are valid, or maybe they are. Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you, Rahul, for having me. And let me just say this, that I'm not the one who had said this, that vaccines are not needed. Historically, we have used vaccines to eradicate diseases. We have eliminated number of diseases. Everything has been done. But the speed at which these vaccines have been developed, it's not a concern being expressed by me alone or people like me alone, but even a person, the company's head, which has developed maximum number of vaccines in this world, Merck, even its CEO is saying this, that the word he has used is that I cannot push people into this kind of a genocide. That is the word he has used. We cannot overlook the expression made by the ex-VP of Pfizer company. These are all globally renowned people who have been into this business of making vaccines. So that is one part. The second part is that even if the vaccine is, let's say, prepared, vaccines are there, I am reasonably sure that most of these vaccines are safe. They are not unsafe. In fact, I have recently written about it. All these studies, preclinical and clinical studies, have clearly shown that these vaccines are reasonably safe. But is there any immunogenicity because of them is a questionable thing for a number of reasons. One is that they are saying we do not know for how long the immunity, if at all, immunogenicity gets developed, antibodies are developed because of this, how long will this sustain, how long will they last? That is one part. The second part, even the vaccine manufacturers themselves are saying that our vaccines are only to reduce the severity of the disease. It will not prevent infection. People will get infections, but they'll not become severely ill or they'll die or any such thing will happen. So it will only protect them from getting serious infection. If that is the case, then the transmission of infection will not stop because the infection will continuously be there unless otherwise the last person on this planet is vaccinated.
Dr. Madad, do you want to take some of these questions head on? We had recently the head of one of the top global pharma companies say he didn't know if whether I'd got the vaccine, I'd be able to pass the disease on to somebody else. When he's asked this question, he says, frankly, we don't know. You don't know how long somebody will stay immune from the virus. So there are so many unknowns in this equation, which leads to people like Dr. Gupta asking whether the vaccine is worth it at all. Yes, vaccines per se are good, but is this one going to serve the purpose that all of humanity hopes it will? Dr. Madad, respond to Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, well, each of these vaccines have their endpoints. And so with the current COVID-19 vaccine that we have, for example, it's Pfizer, the endpoint is it's going to help prevent a symptomatic individual from progressing to severe disease. And that's exactly the outcome that we do want to see, because we want to prevent severe disease. We want to prevent individuals from being hospitalized and then unfortunately also dying from the disease itself. Now, more information is being collected, and over time we will find out additional information, as you've mentioned, in terms of long-term immunity, in terms of does it have an impact on asymptomatic spread? Does it have an impact being infectious and curbing the transmission of COVID-19? These are certainly key questions that we will find out as time progresses. And so I think it's important to understand that, these vaccines certainly, as I mentioned, have endpoints, but this is a rolling recovery, and this is on a rolling basis. We're going to find more and more information out. And so right now, the data set that we have is very promising. It meets the requirements that we were already looking for. When you look at vaccine development, you have multiple different endpoints. You have multiple different ways of assessing these vaccines in terms of what the overall outcome is going to be. And this is what we do want to see. And so there's more vaccines in the pipeline. You'll probably have, additional information in terms of, are they also able to prevent asymptomatic disease? You have vaccines that are already looking into that. So I think this is something that we're going to find out as time progresses. And I know that we live in an age of instant gratification. We want all the answers at our fingertips right away. That's just not the way sometimes science works. You need to have patience, and you'll find out more information as time progresses.
Dr. Sareen, let's spend a moment on logistics and the supply chain. I was reading a McKinsey DHL study which said it will take 20,000 flights globally to get the vaccine boxes to all parts of the world where the vaccine needs to be administered. The logistics and cold chain requirement in India far bigger than what our current vaccine program entails. We have a strong existing infrastructure, but not strong enough for a rollout at this scale. Therefore, okay, let's assume that the vaccine is safe in these clinical trials. What's the guarantee in a country like India, where the vaccine is being moved from, say, Delhi or Mumbai to some small town in West Bengal or Bihar, that it stays safe till the time it is administered, in terms of the number of days between its landing in India, its manufacturing and the actual inoculation, and whether the level of refrigeration required in that period is actually maintained? Dr. Sareen.
I would just like to add one or 2 points to what Dr. Jamil said and Dr. Bhargav asked. mRNA is a messenger RNA. It is just a protein messenger. This message of the virus is taken into a lipid droplet and it goes into your body. The lipid gets into this cell and disappears. And just the messenger for making that protein is there. There is no gene. So first and foremost, the Pfizer or the mRNA vaccine is not transferring a gene. It will only produce nothing else but a spike protein. And if spike protein is produced in your cell, the body will say, oh, there is a protein, let us make an antibody. That is the only thing. Therefore, I would like to give the trust and assurance as a science person that a mRNA vaccine using simply a nanoparticle of lipid is safe. The second part is the efficacy and effectiveness. The efficacy is where you make antibodies. Effectiveness is where you decrease the infection, you decrease deaths, you decrease ICUs. We only have data today of efficacy of antibodies. Third part is reactogenicity. The vaccine, when you give, it gives a reaction. The reaction can be local or it can be systemic. So just to give you an idea, people will have fever, cough, that is systemic. But if you have redness, that is local. We have enough data today, and in fact, New England Journal published just yesterday on the Pfizer's phase 2 and 3, and it says it is fairly good. You just have fever. Elderly people have less side effects than the younger people. The COVID vaccine, the one which we have in India from Serum Institute, is fairly good. The data was published 2 days ago. Its reactogenicity, its safety and efficacy have been fairly well proven. So that brings one part of your discussion, that yes, the last 3 days data gives me an assurance, and if you ask me, I'll put out my arm to get the jab. Now, the cold chain and the way logistics are, I think these are huge challenges. Pfizer vaccine now can be taken into by cold storage at -70, but you can take it out for 5 days and keep it into a refrigerator, and you can use batches of 950 odd people at a given go. I don't think that's a huge problem. However, the cost and the logistic of getting it from US and India will get it. But I'm sure Pfizer will help India to make its own vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine can be made. Now the Indian vaccine and the Russian, the Sputnik, both can be very useful. They can be at a lower, much higher temperature like in 228 or -4. I think they can be very suitable. Now all the trials are using the best practices, but that is not what point of care when the vaccine is given. So I am really, and I share your concern, despite best efforts anywhere in the world to have the vaccine properly stored, delivered and given is a huge challenge. And I therefore feel we have to learn from our experiences. But India is ready. We have the cold chains. We have done all the vaccines. And I can also tell you one more example. When hepatitis B vaccine, on which I worked, when it came, early fear was we can't maintain a cold chain. India maintained cold chain. The vaccine is given effectively. So therefore, I have no doubt in my mind, but yes, safety is above efficacy, it is above effectiveness.
Dr. Shahid Jamil, now let's come to some questions which are in the minds, I'm sure, of all viewers. Which vaccine should they try and take? Should they wait for a private vaccine to come along, pay extra money? Is it worth the wait? Or should they just go with whatever the government puts out first? And what is the guarantee that whether it's the Sputnik, the Russian vaccine, it's been tested fully in the same manner as, say, a Pfizer or a Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has? Now, these are questions that are swirling through people's head. Can you share your thoughts on whether they should wait for a private vaccine or give what the government gives or take what the government gives? And how do you compare the different nations and how those vaccines have been trialed in their countries, because everybody doesn't have the same standards?
Well, let us get one thing straight. All the efficacy data that we have seen so far is efficacy by press release. Efficacy by press release is for shareholders, it is for the stock markets. Let us wait for the scientific data to come out, and some of it is beginning to come out. Point number two, it's very hard to say that vaccine A is better than vaccine B because vaccines are not tested against each other. Vaccines are tested against placebo, against a salt solution. So to say that a 95% efficacy vaccine is better than a 90% efficacy is, you just can't say at this point. Point number three, the efficacy of any vaccine drops a little bit when it goes in the field compared to the controlled situation in a trial. So keep that in mind. I think the most important thing is not to worry about, 80% versus 90%. The most important thing is to see whether the vaccines have been tested for safety in the population that it is meant for. I think that's very, very important. So I would say that the vaccines that are being tested in India, the safety data is coming out. They appear to be safe. And of course, as time goes on, we'll learn more and more about it. But it's also a fact that most of the adverse reactions happen during the first 6 weeks. And that is precisely the reason why emergency use authorization requires at least 2 months of safety data. So there is actually a science to it. Now, if you will allow me, let me address what Dr. Gupta said about whether, the difference between infection and disease and transmission. Most vaccines that are available to us today that we take normally do not prevent infection, they prevent disease. And if a vaccine prevents disease, then logically the pathogen, when it goes into our body, it doesn't replicate or multiply to the extent that it would otherwise in a non-vaccinated person. And therefore, if the load of the pathogen is low, the possibility of transmitting to another person also reduces. So vaccines do prevent transmission, and I believe that these vaccines will also prevent transmission, not just disease. And finally, about the cold chain that you asked, Professor Sareen, if you look at what Government of India has put out, they have said that India has over 85,000 refrigerators available as of today. 29,000 refrigeration points are available, and there is currently capacity to store 6 crore doses, enough to vaccinate 3 crore people that India is prioritizing. That capacity is already there. So I have no doubt that whatever vaccines are being made available here, once the regulator approves them, we will have the wherewithal to deliver it in a proper manner. And beyond that, we are looking at about 150,000 vaccinators out of roughly 200 and out of roughly 2.5 lakh ANMs that are available in the country. So that's quite reassuring, actually.
Dr. Anna Maria, how does the WHO view the efficacy of the different vaccine candidates? You know, I realize that all the experts think it's not a big deal, take whatever vaccine comes your way, but virtually everyone who's watching will wonder which, it's like a brand like Nike, Adidas, Reebok, which of these should you wait for? And that's the way people play it. You don't want them to play it like that in their heads, but that's the way people are wondering. Do I trust the Russians? Do I not trust the Russians? Do I trust Pfizer more than I trust Moderna? And questions like that. So how do you see this question that's in people's mind about which of these vaccines should they try to be aiming for?
Yes, I mentioned before, and Dr. Madad mentioned that, and there are 2 points. Each developer, each research group prepares the documentation, the trials, the studies in animals, everything, and puts it in a dossier. And then these dossiers are reviewed by independent experts, experts on vaccines and trials, experts in regulation, all around the world, and also at WHO. So they don't look at the nationality of the vaccine, they don't look at where the trial was done, but they look at the evidence in its own merit. And what we have, once you have a vaccine that is recommended by the experts and by the regulators, then you can be reassured that that vaccine passes the bar, the threshold of quality, safety, and efficacy that has been set for before. So you don't need to worry choosing yourself. You need to be reassured that the vaccine you are going to receive is a vaccine that already passes an international set of standards that has been agreed. That's the first thing. The second is that vaccines can be useful in different contexts. Some of the vaccines, for example, will require 1 dose and others 2. So for certain populations, it's more adequate to have a 1-dose vaccine than a 2-dose vaccine. We were talking about the cold chain. I agree with the speakers before me that the cold chain is not the problem. Just to tell you, WHO with the Ministry of Health of the Democratic Republic of Congo just used an Ebola vaccine that requires -60 to -80 in Eastern Congo, and 320,000 people were vaccinated with informed consent and follow in a place of Africa that is very difficult. I have lived and worked in India, and I am also fully reassured that the Indian government and the Indian people who work together to eradicate the smallpox, to eradicate polio, to reduce measles and other diseases will achieve this goal again. You have the know-how, the infrastructure, and the capacity to do it. And the Indian people should be very proud, because every time India has said, we will do it, has achieved the goals and has set an example globally. And finally, I just want to say that in the beginning, the number of doses of all these vaccines, unfortunately, will be limited. And the public health experts in India and around the world will make decisions on who are the people who are at the highest risk of dying of this disease, or who are exposed because of the work they do or the role in society, like the healthcare workers, and they will be protected first. And I think that this is together with all the other measures that we will have to continue to implement. And I want to take my last minute to say that it's very important for the Indian citizens and for all around the world that we understand the vaccines will be an extra tool to help initially protect those who are more vulnerable to severe disease, and also to contribute. And we have to remember that our best strategy is to prevent the virus from going from person to person. therefore washing hands, wearing masks, keeping social distancing, reducing the number of people you have contacts with are additional strategies to prevent that. And then I want to clarify something on the vaccine evaluation. When you do a trial, at random, you choose people in areas where the virus is transmitted, and at random give the vaccine to some and give a placebo to others. And then you measure what is the number of people that got sick or got COVID confirmed by the laboratory in both groups. And this is what they have done. They have looked at how many cases of COVID confirmed by the lab were in the vaccine group and in the placebo group. And then they look at how many of these cases require hospitalization or die. And as Dr. Madal says, as we move forward, we will learn more. As more people get vaccinated, we will learn more. But it doesn't mean that we are guessing. Already we come from a good foundation of data that permits regulators and independent experts all around the world make decisions.
Dr. Sareen, how do we ensure that there isn't a free-for-all, a mad scramble? The moment the government says that vaccines are now available, the rich and the influential could start using fair means and foul to try and get access to the vaccine first. Now that in a country like India is entirely possible. How do you ensure that this doesn't happen, Dr. Sareen?
Rahul, you have really sensed the mood of the people. Everyone wants a vaccine. Everyone is having a hope in that, and that hope is so huge that there could be a mad scramble, and that's why prioritization is. So vaccine, in a way I should say the word rationing, but proper planning for usage of vaccine has been done by the government and by the expert group. However, there is a possibility that many people can do by smuggling or by other methods and get the vaccine. But the people must understand that it is a national fight. It's a global village which is fighting. People have to understand it. No amount of law, no amount of warnings will make people understand. Yes, you are staying at home, but the frontline worker, the doctor, the nurse, the technician, the policeman, the driver, conductor, they are fighting it. So please allow them to be protected first, and that's our duty. Secondly, people have to thank them for what they have done for last 10 months or so. So don't allow them not to get it, because if you get it with the limited supply, they may not be able to get it. Therefore, please, genuinely I request that people should understand this. Thirdly, people who have got the corona earlier, they might have the antibodies. I am not saying their antibody levels are high, but if, let's say, Delhi had a survey, Pune had a survey, Bombay, that 20% of the people already have antibodies. I am not saying that those who have antibodies or had prior exposure to COVID should not get it. There is very limited data. Their antibodies may not be enough, but they can wait. So I would say, let those who are on there, let there not be a scramble, let there be a proper understanding. And India showed it very well to keep distance. There was very clear message. So I would say that
Dr.
the
Narendra
people's
Gupta,
movement and
there are people who say that in the way the vaccine has spread through states like Bihar, which even after the elections, after mass violation of all COVID protocols, didn't see a massive surge in the number of deaths or cases. That's probably because the vaccine is already spread in the community, as it were. Even if we haven't reached the herd immunity level, it's spread far and wide in the community, and therefore by the time your turn comes for the vaccine a few months later, maybe we've already achieved herd immunity as a city, as a state, as a country, and we won't need the vaccine at all. How do you respond to naysayers who are saying these kind of things? Well, what's your sense? Is that even fair? Is that even a correct way of thinking, Dr. Gupta?
I think that kind of a situation already has come to a certain extent, and there are enough evidences for it. You see that many of these events have happened in spite of that, and the weather had become a very extreme, in the sense like the winter has set in. In spite of that, the numbers are continuously declining. The number of people who are getting infected and the number of people who are dying are continuously declining. As I was doing a simple calculation today, it says that there are 3,63,749 people who are currently active cases in this. If we take 5% of it as a critical, then the number comes to about 18,187 for the entire country of 1.35 billion. if for the country of 1.35 billion, there are only 18,187 people who are critically ill, and that too are limited into big towns like Delhi, Bombay, Chennai, Ahmedabad, or so on. This is a very small number. Means we have to first, to go for the vaccination, we have to find a reason that we really need a vaccination or not. Because the current indication, of course, one of the thing is that I also wanted to bring in this issue of COVAX, that this Gavi, WHO, and they all said that they'll be doing the pooled procurement and then there'll be equitable distribution of vaccines. Nothing of that sort is visible. Countries who could afford to buy vaccines, they already have pre-booked vaccine to the extent that 5% more, 5 times more than what is required for their entire population. That is a kind of a situation. There is a bad rush. But I am not worried because they have very high level of mortality and high level of morbidity.
Okay, Dr. Madad, I'll let you respond to that concern. That by the time your turn comes for actually having the vaccine, maybe you don't need the vaccine at all because the virus is already spreading so fast in the community. Dr. Saira Madad.
I think this is going to the mentality of letting the virus spread and getting it naturally and basically walking over gravestones. And I don't think that's obviously a great approach for many different reasons. We want to make sure that people get vaccinated once the vaccine is available, because the entire goal is to reduce morbidity and mortality in individuals from getting infected and from hospitalizations and dying from it. If you're looking at the data around the world today, you have thousands of new cases coming. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that when you look at the virus and you see that, certainly a number of people, a number of people will have a good outcome, but you're seeing long COVID symptoms persist for a certain period of time. We don't know the overall sequelae of this disease. You're seeing more and more information come out in terms of people having mild cases, but then down the line they have increased risk of cardiovascular disease, lung disease, renal disease. And so really, really important for people to understand that when a vaccine is made available, this is something that's going to help prevent from those types of occurrences. And so certainly, natural infection is something that's going to continue to happen. It's happening. We have a raging pandemic all over the United States, all over the world. And so we want to make sure that people understand that when a vaccine is made available, that you do get vaccinated to prevent these severe outcomes from actually happening.
I'm going to leave it over there. Dr. Anna Maria, Dr. S.K. Sareen, Dr. Shahid Jamil, Narendra Gupta, and Dr. Saira Madad for taking out time from your extremely busy schedules and for joining us with really very incisive thoughts on all these questions around the vaccine debate. Thank you very much. Deeply appreciate your presence on this global roundtable around whether or not it's safe to go ahead and get vaccinated now that the vaccines will soon be made available to the common public. Thank you so much for watching, for your time and your trust. Thank you. Goodbye.